Thanks for being here. We're here to announce today that we're introducing the House and Senate version of the Debt Buy-Down Act of 2010. This will empower taxpayers to help us out in paying off the debt. We in Congress, and certainly I think we know by now, aren't inclined or don't have the political will to do what's necessary to buy down the debt. I wish we could claim credit for this idea. It's actually been introduced a few times before in the early 90s, although Senator McCAIN has been, as a co-sponsor, a few times, a few different iterations. It was first introduced by Bob Walker in the House and Senator Bob Smith. At that point, the debt, this was in 1993, I believe, the debt was just shy of $4 trillion. It's $13 trillion today. It was a good idea then. It's a great idea today. We are going to see a record-breaking deficit this year, $1.4 trillion. The debt, as I mentioned, is already at $13 trillion. At the current trend, by the end of the decade, the debt will be $20 trillion. I think all of us recognize we cannot have a growing economy. We cannot sustain this level of debt. This legislation simply requires that the IRS include a checkoff on your tax forms that will allow individuals to designate up to 10% of their taxes to go toward buying down the debt. It then will require that the Congress cut a commensurate amount of spending in the following year. If Congress fails to do that, then there will be a sequester of funds, and so this will not increase the debt or the deficit. It will simply require Congress to do the difficult job that we've thus far failed to do. So with that, I'll introduce Senator McCAIN. Like I said, he's been on this bill a few times, or a slightly different iteration of this bill before, and pleased to be with Senator McCAIN here. He's fought for a long time to rein in excess spending, and also not just the level of spending, but the type of spending we do with earmarking and whatnot. So, Senator McCAIN.
I'm pleased to be joined by my good friend Congressman Jeff Flake, who's been a valiant fighter for fiscal discipline and against earmarks and pork barrel spending long ago when it was not very popular. He has made it popular through a steadfast advocacy for the taxpayer. As Jeff mentioned, this legislation would require the IRS to include a checkoff on tax forms. It would provide taxpayers the flexibility to voluntarily designate up to 10% of their tax liability to be put toward debt reduction. It doesn't ask taxpayers to sign away any part of their federal refund. In order to ensure that the reductions in the debt are protected, the bill requires an equal amount of permanent reductions in federal spending. It also establishes a trust fund in which to put these funds pending their use to retire debt obligations. So this legislation, as Jeff mentioned before, has been introduced before. I'm confident that we are at a point now where the American people are ready to embrace such a measure. I've never seen the anger and frustration about the spending and the debt and the deficit as there is today throughout the country, as exhibited by the Tea Parties. And the fact is that federal spending has grown 8 times faster than median income over the last several decades. Federal spending is projected reaching nearly $36,000 for every household in America, and the deficit for 2009 was more than $1.4 trillion, and as we know, the deficit for 2010 will be about $1.5 trillion. So in May, the national debt hit a historic milestone, surpassing $13 trillion, and that is projected to go up to $20 trillion by the end of the decade. For many years, when I talked about the debt and the deficit and profligate spending, and Jeff did too, Americans and our citizens in Arizona would nod and share our concern. Now they're angry. Now is the time that I believe we can get support for this legislation, because the American people feel that it's time for it. I would point out that it's been endorsed by the Americans for Tax Reform, Citizens Against Government Waste, the National Taxpayers Union, the Club for Growth, Americans for Prosperity, and the Committee for Responsible Federal Government. And there will be literally every taxpayer watchdog organizations in America and here in Washington in favor of it. So I think we can get the American people behind it. It's time we did something about it, and this is, I think, one way that we could not only reduce the deficit, but also reduce spending at the same time. Any questions?
Let me just say, we finally found an earmark that we can both support, allowing individuals to earmark a portion of their taxes to pay down the debt.
All right, thanks very much.
Thanks.